Hi, welcome to Talking and Reading from Japan. I'm your host, Hidemi Woods. I'll read some episodes from the books I wrote and talk about it or talk about anything that pops up in my mind. I hope you enjoy with me. Today, I'm gonna read an episode from one of the books I wrote titled An Old Tree in Kyoto. Today's episode is called Eaten Up by Chrysathemums. This is about my grandfather's cherished chrysanthemums. Eaten Up by Chrysathemums. After my grandfather quit a chair of a local chrysanthemum association, the number of his chrysanthemum pots had gotten less and less in the front yard of our house. Visitors to see his chrysanthemums had also tapered off to almost none. He stopped exhibiting them at a public display. Yet, he had still grown a few pots and brought his best pot to a ward office by his bike as a gift. No one in the ward office asked for it, but my grandfather was sure that everyone appreciated. He delivered every year, and once he did it on a very windy day. He put a pot on the back carrier of his bike and set off. When he arrived at the ward office, the flower had been snapped off by the wind somewhere on the way, and only the stalk was left on the pot. He turned back home right away and carried his second best pot. When he arrived, the flower was again gone in the wind. He successfully delivered his chrysanthemum on his third trial. To my father, that was the funniest incident in his entire life. Soon, my grandfather stopped delivering his chrysanthemums anywhere because he became too weak to ride his bike. Even so, he continued to look after chrysanthemums in the yard until he passed away. Spending years besieged by my grandfather's chrysanthemums, I had fostered hostility to them. He monopolized the yard so autocratically that they symbolized his egotism. Eventually, I detested them. I even had the impression that my childhood is ruined and eaten up by chrysanthemums. Now, I live in the town far away from my hometown, and when I see them on display, such as at the train station in autumn, I remember my grandfather. And I realized I actually think they are beautiful and I like them. That's today's episode about my grandfather's chrysanthemums. As I said before, I lived with my grandparents throughout the whole my childhood. And in that life, there were quite a few inconveniences around me. The yard of the house was surely one of them, or actually the biggest one, I think. The biggest disturbance of my childhood was my grandfather. That was for sure. And the second one was what he did around the house, in the house, for us, to us. So after he was a farmer too, and when I was little, he and my father and my mother worked in a farm, in a field together. And then my grandfather retired, and so farming was done by my parents only. And after my grandfather retired, he found chrysanthemums as his hobby. It was raising chrysanthemums had become the center purpose of his life. So the front yard of the house was literally filled with his chrysanthemums. There were almost 600 pots at least. So everywhere I looked at the front yard, the only thing came into my eyes was the vast wave of chrysanthemums. As a child, I felt like chrysanthemums were gobbling our house. They were assaulting me, because as a child, I wanted to play in the yard, but small activities were allowed, but anything that possibly harmed his chrysanthemums was banned. So my play in the yard was strictly regulated because of his chrysanthemums. He cherished those chrysanthemums that much, and the other members of the family sacrificed freedom for his hobby. We were forced to be patient, or we were forced to sacrifice anything that might disturb his chrysanthemums. So the most so the chrysanthemums were um, the highest ranking members of my family back then. And so naturally, it was natural for me to dislike them, because it was my enemy. And I couldn't get a dog, puppy. I couldn't play actively, because those things would harm his chrysanthemums. And my mother's dream was to do a barbecue with her friends. She in her entire life, she told me that she wanted to invite her friends over the house and enjoy barbecuing with them in the yard. And of course, it was never materialized, because there's no space for barbecuing. The space was totally occupied by my grandfather's chrysanthemums. So my family was just being quiet and just we lived quietly under the chrysanthemums occupation. And so I was dreaming of getting rid of those chrysanthemums. And I hated my grandfather, and also I hated chrysanthemums. And it had become the least favorite flower of mine, chrysanthemums. But the funny thing is that I although I hated my grandfather so much, I had become fond of him after he passed away. Now I even miss him. And in the same token, it's really interesting that I like chrysanthemums now. It's chrysanthemums are one of my favorite flowers. So I didn't appreciate them when my grandfather grew them. But now I understand. Now I can appreciate them. But they are all gone, as I had dreamed of. So every time I happen to see chrysanthemums anywhere, I really think they are beautiful, and at the same time, I really, really miss my grandfather. And I think he was, for some reason, my grandfather was obsessed with growing chrysanthemums. It was his only, it had become his only hobby, his favorite thing to do for his life, in his later life. But I'm sure he thought they were beautiful. That's why they grabbed my grandfather's heart so strongly, I guess. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed with me, and I hope you come back here again. I'm Hidemi Woods. If you are interested in more of what I wrote or my music also, please visit hidemywoods.com, HIDEMY woods.com, where I put up everything of my articles and music or this podcast. So please take a look at it if you like. Thanks again. See you next time. Until next time, take care and be well.